Thanks, Richard. Hey, guys. Thanks for joining today. My name is David Gutelius. I'm the CEO and founder of Motiva. Some of you may have heard of us in the Eloqua community. We've been around quite some time. Today is not a sales pitch for Motiva. It's really talking about AI at a much higher level for the most part. I'll have some examples from Motiva, but really the point is to kind of unpack what's happening with AI right now. Things are moving very fast, as you might know. And I wanted to get on with Richard and forethought here and give everyone a chance to kind of understand what is happening from my perspective as a practitioner in the space, and give you a chance to ask me questions or get into discussion about things you care about here. Just in terms of agenda, it's going to be pretty tight here, about 30 minutes of content from me. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. I'll start with 3 principles that I think make you a more effective partner with AI as it exists today. And again, talking about AI at a very broad level, not tool specific, but more how do I think about working with AI and getting the most out of it. Second, I'll give you some examples of patterns, both patterns and anti-patterns to follow or avoid, and give you some examples of those. And then finally wind up with what I think is coming, what's in process right now in the field at large, and why I think it matters for marketers and marketing ops teams. And then we'll have a good, hopefully about 15 minutes of Q&A to get into things. But if we don't cover anything, I'm easily available. It's david@motiva.ai. And as Richard mentioned, I've got some experience in this field, about 2 decades, specifically within artificial intelligence, playing a bunch of different roles, some of which were more exciting than others. I got started with the US government's largest AI and analytics programs post 9/11. That brought me very quickly into the commercial space, where I started work through a DARPA project that eventually wound up being Siri and a bunch of other really exciting startups in the sort of early commercialization of AI. And then more recently, I've worked with a bunch of global companies around just building up effective AI programs at the enterprise level, mostly focused on sort of questions about how we can put machines and humans together in the same virtual room to do bigger and better things. That's kind of my shtick, is thinking about not just AI as its own capability, but really the combination of the best of what humans can do and the best of what machines can do to produce something that's very different in terms of capabilities. So yeah, so that's me. Let me just dive right into it. 3 things that I think that will make you more effective in terms of working with this new generation of AI. And this is specifically about generative AI, this little section here. There's lots of different flavors of artificial intelligence out there in machine learning. What we're talking about today is kind of that larger set of things, but there are 3 things, and everybody's talking about LLMs and OpenAI and whatever tools you're using in this space. There's a lot of excitement around generative. It does present a very different kind of capability within AI than we've ever had before. And I can talk more about that if you're interested. There's a bunch of technical details in there. But suffice to say, what we have today in terms of tools, in terms of raw capability from this transformer learning approach, gives us new kinds of things that we can do with artificial intelligence that we have not been able to do before anywhere near as effectively. So 3 things. Number 1 is invite AI to help as much as possible across your life. And this goes across your personal life, it goes across your work life. But the principle being, you want to figure out ways that you can refer to AI, invite AI to the table, ask AI to help as much as possible. And I'll get into why in a second. Number 2 is exploit what I call the jagged frontier of all of these different capabilities and models and tools out there. And number 3 is learning to speak almost like a new conceptual language. It's not like, a foreign language, but it is thinking perhaps in different ways in order to meet the models where they're at. And the models are shifting, so it's a little bit of kind of a moving target, I guess. But this notion of learning how these models think, and I'm holding my air quotes up here, they don't think in the way that we do, but they do present some sort of reasoning capabilities and characteristics. And so understanding where each of those models are gives you the better way to actually get in and get something out of them, whatever that is. Okay, so just a deep, a little bit more, one click down on each of those things. The basic thing that's happening is that artificial intelligence is becoming more a part of our lives, whether we know it or not. So everything that you interact with digitally basically has some sort of AI system behind it at some level. And that might be more apparent than others. So you're probably, used to working with something like Siri for all its pluses and minuses. That's one example, or Alexa is another kind of thing. But every ad you see, a lot of the emails that you personally interact with will have some AI system behind them. And that's just becoming more and more the case. There's really no going back unless you want to drop your digital life, which I suppose you can try to do, getting increasingly harder to do. But the fact of the matter is that artificial intelligence will become just a part of the patchwork that we call life here on Earth. The other observation here is that these models, the best models, and really I'm talking about the what's called so-called the frontier models, which are the top commercial and open source models out there. So there are tons of these things, the generative models out there. They all kind of work the same. They have different approaches to how they gather data, how they process that data, and finally make their way into a large language model. So the top models are pretty good now, as of this month, June of 24, pretty good at lots of different things. They're not absolutely accurate. So their accuracy is still not a hallmark of what they're able to do. But if you're looking to use cases where you can do something like get advice on certain medical things, you don't want to do that quite yet. They're working on it. It's getting better all the time. But just broadly speaking, if you look horizontally across these things, they do a lot of things pretty well. And I keep being surprised at how well they do certain things. And so just to give you, kind of a use case, I was looking up something in the tax code, for instance, here in the US. I had a question and, I could choose to email my CPA and then, have him take a week or two to get back to me and ask me a clarifying question, probably, because he always does this. And, I decided, well, let's just see what in this case, GPT-4 Omni could do. And I flipped on ChatGPT, and it's pretty specific about the question I was asking, and it gave me a very detailed, reasoned response, which I then went and checked just to make sure it wasn't feeding me a hallucination or something, but it was spot on. And it was exactly what I needed, and was something that I could get immediately instead of waiting around for my CPA to get back to me. So a simple, small example, but maybe a more impressive example recently has been some DeepMind's work in kind of pushing the scientific frontier and using generative models to do things like discover new early stage clinical candidates in terms of therapeutics and drugs and that sort of thing. So the potential here is really exciting. And I guess the thing that I've learned and that I suggest as much as possible to everyone that asks me is that as you start to invite AI to your space, as you start to incorporate it into your working life, you find that the style of your work starts to change, that you're starting to know where to trust AI in terms of certain things that you would have otherwise had to do yourself or ask your CPA or, whatever it is. And it does start to change the way you work and improve the way you work, depending on how consistent you are in terms of bringing that AI to the space. So bring it to the party. Use it as much as you can. It's not always going to do what you want it to do, but these things are getting better and better. And that's the other thing that the second thing that I wanted to advise is it's amazing how far we've come since 2019, GP2 sort of novelty, natural language processing. You do some things. We actually had a very first generative product at Motiva out that used GPT-2 to do some very, very simple things because that's all you could basically ask it to do. It's pretty bad. Versus GPT-3 in 2000 and the first versions were out in 2020. 100x efficiency gain just in terms of what it could do with the same level of compute. And, reasoning wise, it was probably like a smart elementary school student kind of level, massively better than GB2, which was just, it wasn't anything really, NLP basically. And then you get to GPT-4 last year, again, 100x step change in terms of efficiency, really impressive gains in terms of reasoning-like characteristics. And, broadly speaking, across lots of different questions and use cases, these things are evaluated on, kind of at the level of a smart high schooler, maybe even an undergrad for a bunch of things. So incredibly impressive gains if you're just looking at OpenAI, and this isn't an advertisement for OpenAI. Anthropic, just as good. Claude Sonnet, the 3.5 that just got released this past week, is better than anything else currently. So it's kind of this week's current winner. But the point being, like, these things are constantly changing. And the other thing is they're not the same. So Claude is not the same as exactly as OpenAI. It's not the same as Gemini. It's not the same as Llama 3. They all do have some things that they do a little bit better than the others. And that's what I call this jagged edge, this frontier edge of capability for across the models. It's constantly changing. So every incremental release you see, it changes the boundaries of what these things can do. So it's about exploring those edges for yourself and the things that you care about, having these things help you with, and figuring out for what you need to do, which model, which approach, which tools actually have the right answer or a more helpful set of solutions for you. And it does require some time. So the rule of thumb that I give usually is you want to spend at least 10 hours with a model, just sort of exploring around. You can use, ChatGPT, you can use the Claude interface, you can use Motiva for certain things, but it does require some time to get to those sweet spots, just to find where the advantages are with these different tools. And the third principle is this sort of notion of communication. It is, again, not learning a foreign language, but learning to speak in a way, to ask questions in a way, to give directives in a way that the model understands and can use to output the best, give you the best output possible. So generally speaking, it's about this notion of like incremental quality control. So these one-shot kinds of attempts when you're faced with that like text box, like what am I going to ask ChatGPT or whatever it is. If you're not really into like going back and forth with it pretty deeply, you're probably not going to be impressed by the results. You might be. It's sort of a hit or miss, and every release is a little better than the last. But generally speaking, the clearer you can be, the more specific you can be. There's this notion of, you might have heard of it, chain of thought types of prompts where you're giving a very step-by-step directive to the query engine and having it interpret that so that it can give you a decent output. But it does require, it's not, none of that feels necessarily very natural these days. So that's kind of the downside is it's still a little wonky to use a lot of the models directly. And at Motiva, we're really interested in trying to solve for some of those things because we're not developing our own large language models ourselves, but we are user facing. And so if we can, handle some of that friction, that's good. So those are the three more or less high level principles. In terms of patterns and anti-patterns, so just thinking about, what are kind of common patterns of how you approach working with, outside of just sort of personal experimentation, I guess, how you approach working with these tools. I would say, four big things for enterprise, especially, which is where I spend all my time these days. One is back to point number one is thinking about how do you bring a kind of, eager, sort of capable, quite capable intern into your workflows, and pick the workflows that are the most painful, the most time consuming, probably, to address first. And so you can probably think to yourself, like, what do I hate to do? What do I spend all this time during my day doing that I could have some help with? And, not just an AI agent, but if you had like an intern, and you train that intern up, like spend some time and you give that intern some context and they can kind of take care of some things. What would those things be? And so from a marketing standpoint, we often kind of go through this exercise with onboarding, enterprise customers. It's just thinking through as a team, like, what do you hate to do? Like, what's taking all your time? What are you, not unsure about? And uncovering those opportunities for the right kinds of AI to help in the right kinds of ways. So that's the first kind of principle. The second, a little less obvious, is developing this experimental mindset and really thinking about there's all these things that we can constantly improve. Super difficult for a human team of any size to do without some sort of help. But now we've got some AI helpers for some of these things. And so the way that we're thinking about our segments, the way we're thinking about, I don't know, frequency or touch point management optimization, the way we're thinking about data cleaning, all of those questions that used to be very manual tasks only, we can now actually involve AI in trying to improve in some way. And so just to give you a few examples of that with Motiva, and again, this is not a sales pitch. I'm just going to give you a few very quick peeks at the product and just in terms of how we're using AI in pretty practical problem solving. So in terms of that contact cleaning, contact quality assessment, the problem that we noticed is that all these ESPs are using AI themselves to filter incoming email. And sometimes they send back signals, sometimes they don't, sometimes they auto scan everything and click on everything, sometimes they don't, or they have it doing something silently in the background. Point being, your emails that you're sending out are not necessarily getting clean signal back. And what we're trying to do is use all of that activity DB information in Eloqua to assess on a very granular basis what's real and what's not in that signal and give you a sense of who is actually home at the other end of that email address. Is there anyone? Is it just machines? In terms of filtering, what are those ESPs doing? And we'll give you a sense of like who's reachable and who's not using our own artificial intelligence. So that's one area. Another area that we're super excited about is actually getting into assessing like what is working from a content perspective for particular segments or personas. And we're using large language models in the back to use and combining that with your data to, in this case, come up with a voice, particular things that work or don't work, that we can then incorporate into actually creating new content that will work for this persona. And it's based on, your own data, basically. It's analyzing the full text of the emails that you're sending out and again, pulling out those lessons for you so that you can put those into something like a generative kind of experience. And the other area where this becomes really easy is using generative AI to create new high quality variations of content, using what we know about your data, using what we know about your brand, and very quickly creating new variations that can then go into message testing. So for instance, if instead of just, doing like a two-way test on a simple campaign in Eloqua, we've got a very easy way to throw message tests right on the canvas and then use those generated versions from the stuff that's working for this segment right in a message test on the canvas. And so Motiva in this case is then taking care of, once you set up the basic parameters of the experiment, taking care of all of the experimentation in the background. There's no human involvement at that point. You're just using variations that Motiva's taken from the generative text experiment and then throwing it into this live message test situation. And so Motiva in this case then also takes care of all of the time savings, all of the interpretation dynamically during the campaign. And what this does is not just save time, but we can also figure out further, like what specific types of strategies, tone, design, whatever it is working best for this persona. So there's a bunch of things that we can be very practical with AI here, just in terms of picking the right use cases, inserting just the right amount of AI that's bounded and attached to specific use cases, specific problems we're trying to solve, and then letting AI actually take the lead or get, just fully automate the task in this case for us. Now, that's not everything. Whether it's generative or some other type of machine learning or artificial intelligence, that, it's not a universal that all AI is going to work just as well in everything. So being very selective, taking that experimental mindset and picking well those use cases becomes really important here. And then just a couple of other points here that we think are success patterns that we've seen work for especially enterprise teams. You want to start to take a look at your approvals processes, oftentimes where existing processes, decision making were constructed in a past era where you had lots of human eyeballs on lots of different things. And some of that's related to regulatory requirements, and you can't really do much about that. But there are a lot of other things that don't need to be as hard as they are or take as long as they do. And it's worth reviewing some of those as a team so that you can take fuller advantage of some of what AI can bring. And a little bit related to that, it's also about creating space for AI and space for data, because as you can probably imagine, AI needs data. So it is a question, and every company has a different answer to this, and it's okay. But being very clear on what the boundaries and policies are around use of AI and data just basically clarifies what's possible for the team, and it just helps align the team a lot better about what's next, just in terms of what we try to do with these things. Similarly, I would say that patterns to avoid, workflows that what I call one-shot roulette with ChatGPT. It's kind of fun to play with ChatGPT, right? But it's also easy to waste a lot of time, and expecting very much out of like pretty simplistic one-shot experiments is mostly a waste of time, unless you've got time to waste and you want to be entertained, and that's fine. But in terms of real enterprise experimentation, taking that kind of approach isn't really all that effective. And there are much better ways to do that, and we can talk about some of those. A corollary to that is what I call the satisfaction of the mediocre, where you're sort of impressed with what it can do kind of out of the box with very little effort, and then you don't get any further. And so we had a customer that, took like an hour on ChatGPT to create something that was, as good as if they were creating an email, trying to create an email variation of something, or a couple of variations. And yeah, it took them like an hour with ChatGPT to create this. And they had fun and like they were excited, but the quality of the emails weren't any better. And it took her, an extra hour to do this, where if she just worked with the copywriter, it would have been done in, I don't know, 10 minutes or something based on like what it came up with. So don't be, so impressed with these things. Like they can do a lot, but you have to push them. It's the thing that I keep, I keep learning. And the way that Motiva is designing its products and how it's really exploiting these large language models, it's really forcing them to do a lot of work on behalf of our customers, because out of the box, they're fine, but they're not great. A couple of other anti-patterns to avoid is you want to be aware that, especially if you're just using the consumer version of ChatGPT and that's it, you by default are giving your permission out to, in that case, OpenAI, to use your data however it wants to, including train new models. You can tell it not to. You can also buy different versions of the enterprise license if you want to get into that. And that's what we do. We actually have a separate contract with OpenAI that gives us and gives our customers much more protection, and does not allow them to use any data that we provide for any other training or any other purpose. It's pretty restrictive. So you don't want to just give your stuff away willy-nilly. That said, you really do want to figure out how to use your own data to shape AI and whatever it's trying to do for you. So being generic or this one-shot roulette kind of stuff, if you're not using your own data, whatever that means, it could be persona data, it could be segment data, it could be the emails that you're using, it could be performance of those emails all of those sorts of things can actually help shape the quality of that AI output pretty concretely. And so you want to figure out ways to do that, whatever tool you use, whether it's Motiva or anything else. So keeping those 2 points, 3 and 4 in mind. And then the fifth, probably the most important, but also the most boring, is not measuring results. You really want to figure out how to measure results along the way and share those across the team. Share your learnings, share what's working and what's not. Finally, what's coming and why it matters to marketers especially. So generally speaking, high level, not marketing specific, much more capable foundation models, not surprising. Horizontally speaking, they'll be at PhD level by 2026, so basically 18 months, on most tasks. So if you think of like now we have sort of eager interns, undergrad interns running around, we're gonna have PhDs running around. And I can't even imagine that, honestly. Like I'm still figuring out how to think about that as a CEO and product guy. Attached to that, this notion of agents, so semi-autonomous, specialized, trainable assistants that can collaborate together. And so if you think of specialists, human specialists that we might have today, now you'll have those same sorts of specialists at the PhD level on most domains working together, supervised by a human or supervised by other agents, but they're working together to collaborate towards common goals. Not surprisingly, AI is going to be even more part of our lives than it already is. And that's, for better or worse, and worse probably. But it is going to be the fact of modern society, is we're just going to have these things around in various different instantiations. And I guess the related point there is that the folks that learn to really control AI will increasingly retain advantage over those who don't or can't. And again, that's not necessarily a universal positive thing. It's more of an observation than anything else. But it is a kind of suggestion that the more you spend time in just understanding what these things can do, the better off you'll be. So why it matters for us here, if you can't guess some of the things here, uh, there's really no downside to at least exploring AI in its various different instantiations, everything from just experimenting with something like ChatGPT or Claude. They're free. The best AI in the world is now free to you to use. And there's some limitations around it, but at a basic capability level, you've never had access to this level of power before as individual human beings. And that's a pretty interesting idea. And so there's a lot of advantage in exploring what these things can do. Um, in the not near future, but I'm not sure how distant it is, a lot of our stuff is just going to be taken care of by our minions, our little assistant minions. They're going to get pretty good at knowing us, knowing what we want, adapting to what works and what doesn't for us personally. And now is the point at which it's still early enough where you can step in, get to understand what these things do, how they work at just a basic level, not technically, but just how they work for you, and actively shape this for you, but also for the marketing function itself. So what I see is as an opportunity for everybody here and everybody I talk to and client base is a chance at this moment to step in and really start to shape the program, start to shape how AI is going to be used and exploited by this organization. Per contact personalization is going to go nuts. The way that we even think about campaigns is going to be a very different thing, could be a very different thing in the future. Not that it will, but it could. And this fourth question of like, what is marketing automation in this case? When you're starting to blend marketing, sales, customer success, and it's just like relationship building, what does that imply about the marketing program, the tools that we use, how we think about contacts, and thus the very human relationships themselves? I think this opens up some really interesting questions coming rapidly because the tools are going to follow these capabilities. And importantly, like finally, what's the best role for us here as we're shaping this, as we're building these things? We are still in control at this point. What are we going to do with this power? Because it is going to be an increasingly powerful capability, and it's up to us to shape that. So I'll leave it there. I went a bit over. I apologize, but let me open it up to questions and feel free to ask. I think, Richard, we have a couple on deck already. So let's get into it.
Yes, thank you, David. That was a great presentation. So we do have a few questions here. So our first one comes from Michelle, and Michelle is asking about the fact that some industries have strict compliance or legal requirements on the content that they might be trying to process with AI.
Yeah.
How does that get applied?
Yeah. It's going to be different for different industries, different requirements, different companies within those industries. So there's sort of at the US federal level, HIPAA types of requirements, right? But even within those very high level requirements, there are more specific requirements and more specific like policy level decisions that individual companies might make operating within that larger like regulatory framework. It is back to that point I made about being very clear and intentional about the program design. And so thinking about um, the the data that you're sharing out with customers and how that happens, being able to audit how that data is used, how to guarantee, for instance, that it's not used by either competitors or by any outside entities. There are a couple of ways to do this. One, Motiva takes is we use zero PII to do what we do, even with the generative stuff. That's a line that we don't think is worth crossing. So we just don't use PII data. We filter it out when we're pulling Eloqua data entirely. And guess what? It doesn't make any difference in terms of performance. So there are ways to do this without violating, for instance, PII regulations that have zero impact on performance, and you can still retain, your data that way. There are more extreme approaches as well that we support, in fact. So we've got a couple of customers that are building their own large language models, run on-prem, and we figure out, how best to work with those on-prem language models, calling remotely, but being very careful about how we do it, and supporting features, some of the features that I showed you here. But that's another answer, is to, lock it all down, lock it all up. The downside to that is very few companies have the internal resources to do a good job at that. So you can stand up an open source language model, train it on your data, and it's probably still won't be anywhere near as good as the frontier models. In fact, it's probably a waste of time at this point. Now, for what we're talking about here. Now, for more specific use cases, might make total sense, because you're not asking the model to do something broad. You're asking it to focus in on a particular, let's say, use case you have in terms of, I don't know, BlackRock is one of our customers, and so they have their own LLM program getting trained up on, as you can imagine, like a specific set of financial services products that they are investing heavily in. They will be fine. I'm not worried about them. But interestingly, like the marketing department has no use for that. They're not allowed to use those resources, and they've been permissioned to use the enterprise flavor, the lockdown flavor of OpenAI. So there are, Michelle, a few different potential approaches you could take, just depending on your own company's kind of tolerance for these things. And again, back to the point I made about having an open discussion on the team about what the policy should be. And, our policies that we've had well adapted to what's coming in the future here. You want to, design something that is aware of trade-offs, perhaps, but also has to obviously operate under whatever regulatory regime that you're facing. But feel free to ask a follow-up to Richard here. I don't know how we're doing that, the chat or something.
Yeah, you can enter your question there. We are getting close on time, because I know, David, you do have another commitment you'll need to move to. But let's see if we can get to two more questions.
Sure.
The first one we have is from Ellen. It says, we always like to hear the good things about this new stuff, but what are some things that are bad with AI that we should avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think I covered some of those things, but again, Ellen, let me know if you have other questions. I would say the time wasting, right? It's just trying stuff willy-nilly that's not really well thought out or designed or attached to a particular use case. Similarly, not measuring results. So if you're going to spend any time on anything, like measure the results. How much time did you save? Did it have a performance impact? Did it not have a performance impact? Like, you want answers to all those things, because you don't want to just, keep trying random experiments with AI. It's just a waste of your time. Be judicious in tool usage, whether it's Motiva or whatever you're using. You want to ask us vendors like hard questions about how you should be using it. What's the best way to get the most out of it? We have generally a lot of experience in, helping marketing teams who are not necessarily like AI experts get the most out of these things. You want to lean on your vendors to really help guide you in this process, and not just like in a support way, but more, like we're talking about here, maybe philosophically or program design wise. Other anti-patterns, I mean, the thing that I didn't mention is just letting inertia prevent you or your team from trying new things. Like that's probably the biggest anti-pattern I see in enterprise is assuming like, we'll wait this out. Like it just doesn't apply to us. And guess what? It does. And some companies are going to go slow, some companies are going to go fast here, but it will affect you. And like I was saying, now is the time to kind of get ahead of whatever is coming here and be the ones that are actively shaping the program, not being shaped by the program or shaped by, higher level like staffing changes. Those sorts of questions are going to be on the table. And so you want to be the ones that are actively shaping that conversation, shaping those policies, shaping those use cases for your companies, or they will shape you and you don't want to be in that situation.
All right, one last, and we'll call this the rapid round. What is the best way to format questions to an AI?
It depends on the question. There's no one answer to that, but I will tell you, here's a secret. I mentioned chain of thought. Go look that up. It doesn't actually matter which of the frontier models you're using, take the same approach. When you're faced with that text box, the first thing you do is ask the model to create a detailed chain of thought for a persona, a very detailed persona being you and whoever wants the answer to the ultimate question. Write me a chain of thought prompt that uses you, model, your sort of specific capabilities. Have it write the chain of thought. Watch that prompt. Next thing you do is say, okay, model, using this chain of thought, do not skip any steps, like be this explicit. Do not skip any steps. Follow this process, and here's what I want you here's a specific question I want you to answer with that chain prompt. Try that. That has tended to work really well across a bunch of different types of questions. There are other techniques I can suggest, some of which are actually just built into Motiva itself. But these are the things that we kind of learn and then figure out how to basically productize so you don't have to, basically explore that jagged frontier on your own forever. But that's one secret that I can share is getting it to write the chain of thought. And doing things like critiquing your own work, like assessing the output. Don't just accept whatever it does. You want it to critique its own work essentially and give you the highest quality output possible.
Yeah, I can certainly echo that last one, reflecting back the output and your input and having it critique. We've been using that extensively lately, and I've been having some very good results. So that's certainly a technique that everyone
Great.
should use.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are out of time. I would like to thank everyone for attending today's office hours.